Oh, news, Pasty. Look at this guy's face. Look at him. Oh, he's going to tell you something really cheeky. He's a cheeky boy. This cheeky boy is going to tell you some cheeky stuff. Can you guess what he's going to say? I think I know because I uploaded it.
Now, the possibility that the COVID-19 virus leaked from a laboratory should not be ruled out. That's
Oh! Oh! Anybody who'd know my work would know that that scream was real. It was real frustration, real frustration, real frustration. Because, of course, anybody who's read The Welcome Fire, the Proximal Origin of COVID Control will know that I examined the people who did the cover-up of that, who did all of that, the Jeremy Farrar, Edward C. Holmes, Andrew Rambeau, and Gary and other people who were intimately involved in this, intimately involved in the cover-up of COVID-19 origins. And this is the BBC finally reporting that it's not a conspiracy theory after trying to say it's a conspiracy theory for the previous 2 years. This is the BBC starting to have to say the truth. And it's only been a couple of years.
according to a former top Chinese government scientist who's been speaking to the BBC. George Gao was director of the Chinese Centre for Disease Control for much of the pandemic and has told a new BBC podcast that the question of the virus's origin remains.
They're even plugging. They're using it to plug a new BBC podcast. It's a new BBC podcast. Hey, we're telling the truth on a new BBC podcast. We're launching this new BBC podcast with the truth. That's what we're going to do, especially only for the first episode. You're going to get the truth about what actually happened in Wuhan. And then after that, we'll continue to see a narrative in your brain, and if you don't take it, then we'll call you names and we'll try and ruin your career, because that's what we do with the BBC. 17 seconds in, for fuck's sake.
Open. Many scientists still believe that the virus is most likely to have passed naturally from animals to humans, but
most scientists still believe that most scientists know. The ones who are telling you, who are out there saying, no, it must have been, they're all part of the scam. They're all connected with the people. They're literally, you can follow the lines down. They're all connected. They're all connected. They're all part of this. And they're the ones, they're the most scientists. Most scientists don't believe that. Most paid people pretending to be scientists who have gone through an education establishment where they don't learn anything. Instead, all they do is say the narrative and speak the lines. There you go. What we got here?
others argue that an accidental leak can't be ruled out. John Sudworth was our correspondent.
They say accidental. They only say accidental. Again, this is going down into another them creating another conspiracy. Must have been an accidental leak. But what if it was leaked on purpose? Oh, conspiracy on top of conspiracy on top of conspiracy on top of conspiracy on top of conspiracy. It's why we're the BBC. That's what we do.
In China until he was forced to leave in 2021. He sent this report from New York.
They were even able to force in, look, he was forced to leave China. They don't say why he was forced. What was it? Was it because of COVID regulations, or was it because the Chinese are such nasty authoritarians? You want to carefully say it so that it's propaganda. This is so he's used words within the first 37 seconds. He's implied and stuck in your brain about 4 or 5 different things that don't follow what he's actually saying, don't necessarily mean that those things are connected. He's thrown them in there just to say, look, these things that you should also check on top. China bad.
Since the world got its first glimpse of the deadly disease circulating in Wuhan, China has dismissed the theory that COVID might have leaked from a lab known to have been experimenting.
Now, look at this. Now they're talking about it. They know they're going to have to come out and admit it eventually. And they're saying, at this point, and China has always dismissed. Like, it's only China who's dismissed those. Is it only China? Is it only China who's dismissed those? Could no one else have dismissed those? Obviously, no one else would have dismissed those.
With coronaviruses as a lie. But now, one of China's most senior scientists seems far less forthright when I ask him about that possibility.
This looks like an operation from the off. This looks like an operation. This is an operation to slowly release the information that they know is got, and BBC are well involved. Their investigative journalists have found 500 times over that the lab leaks from China, but still continue to give you a false narrative. Why is that?
You know, I haven't seen anything. You know, a lot of people have some suspicion, but I haven't seen anything.
But nor can you rule it out?
That was amazing. Right. I look, Gao saying stuff. No, I haven't seen anything. Haven't seen anything. No, haven't seen anything. Haven't seen anything. That's him seeing something.
For science, you have to keep yourself open-minded. Keep yourself open-minded means everything is possible. Don't rule out anything.
He did rule out. They ruled out everything.
Rule out anything.
Look at this dystopian way they've done this.
Was ruled out. Perhaps its association with this man helped cast it as a conspiracy theory.
Oh my God! This is so through the looking glass. Oh, this clip should be studied in universities. To how much conspiracy theory they imply into it all. How much they got to push in. They can't stop themselves. They just can't stop themselves. They're the ones who made Trump into this sort of conspiracy theory idea, and now they're saying maybe it's because people made Trump out to be a conspiracy theorist, and it came from his lips that people thought it was that way. So it's because of you. You're saying it's because of you.
Have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have.
Yes, I have, says the President of the United States.
From some Western
called
scientists
conspiracy
of
theorists.
Overwhelming evidence that the virus, which started in bats, passed naturally.
It started in bats. It was tested. It was changed in the labs. It didn't necessarily start in bats. Again, that's false information seeded in. Yes, coronavirus in bats, and yes, they put it into a lab, and yes, then they tried to do. They put their jiggery pokery and took little bits out of here and little bits out of there. That's no longer in bats. That's now in labs. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying once you take all of these things out of bats, or you breed them within bats unnaturally, and you put them in a lab, there's no longer from bats. That's from a fucking lab. That's from a lab. A lab. Does this look like a lab? No, that's not a lab. That's a fucking wet market.
To humans, perhaps via other animals in a market, a route by which deadly pandemics are known to have emerged in the past.
They're still pushing this. They're still pushing this.
It was that past precedent that influenced the World Health Organization mission to Wuhan, when it too effectively ruled out a lab leak, one of the scientists tells me in an interview for our podcast.
So it ruled out, the World Health Organization ruled out something that it turns out is now true. And we're all still going to go down this road of the BBC saying you should only listen to these guys. We're now reporting that every single one of them was wrong, that we were wrong, even though we knew we were wrong at the time. And it was a state of hyper-normalization where you knew we were wrong, we knew we were wrong, we knew what the situation was, everybody knew, but we all pretended, didn't we? Yes, we did.
Everyone is biased. Yes, I'm biased for...
Right, NEWSPASTE! I can say it! I gotta do it! Wait a minute! Oh, sorry, I just saw that David Bowie has come up from below the grave and he's not looking so well nowadays.
Natural origin because of everything we've seen in the past. The sheer amount of consumption of wild animal meat is such a known high risk situation.
Not true in this situation, is it? Yes, okay, right. There is some chance of spread happening of disease within animals because of the hormones they feed them with, the shit they feed them with, the fact at one point they were feeding like cattle. So you got like BSc and stuff coming up that was again using farms as a kind of lab where you put all of this sort of like testing out what happens to these cattle. And that's your guys who were doing that. So the people who were doing that were people like Roy Anderson and others who were the experts on it and who were and his friends who were involved in doing a lot of this sort of stuff. He's Royal Society. And this woman's like saying, oh yeah, it's us, all of the humans and what we do and etc. Well, no, if you actually farm properly, you won't have all of these diseases. You won't have sick animals. Sick animals are negative for farmers, so farmers cull sick animals. They control the sickness within their own herd nearly all of the time. It's only when you've had things like foot and mouth disease released from a lab in 2000-2001. 2000 probably because the actual panel that got put together to tackle foot and mouth disease was already formed 6 months ago to look at foot and mouth disease for the first time in 30 years before it was announced that there was any foot and mouth disease around and spreading about. And then they were put in charge of the operation and they said, kill everything. Pyres full of burning animals, everything. Let's do this in a different way than we've ever done it before. We kill everything. That's what those people do, and that's what they kind of did. It went to the extremes during COVID as well. Went to the extremes. Look at this person here. They're trying to they're trying to spin this. Oh, yes. This is a story about how COVID was probably from a lab leak. And what this woman's now doing is saying, because of all of the possibility that it came from the natural origins, you should listen to us with all of this spectrum of other things and follow an environmental movement based on fallacies. Now, if you want clean water, you want clean food, you want animals to be treated right, that's environmental movement is good. That's sound. I'm with it. But the environmental movement by these freak bags, look at this person. Do you want to become this person? They don't even seem to have any type of natural facial movements. It looks like they're high.
All along, other scientists, while agreeing that COVID may well have come from animals in a market, say there's not yet enough evidence to definitively rule out the other possibility that it leaked from a lab. And with the change of presidency here in the US, that view, now somewhat freed from its political associations, has gained traction.
What? So they're saying that because of Biden being in office, and Biden being free from the political, that means that it came out. This makes no sense. They've had to jump through hoops galore, mental loops. His face, look at his face. I think that sort of like wonky smile he's got on his face suggests that he knows the bullshit, the level of complete and utter bullshit. I call NEWSPASTE on you, you lying Nazi motherfucker. This is what modern day Nazis look like. Propaganda whores. This is like the people who are feeding you this propaganda in your face, and that little wry smile on the end, is that Duper's delight as well? I look out for it. People who lie and people who mislead, they always show their facial signals, and look at that. He looks like he's just sold you a pup and he knows it.
Following a review ordered by President Biden,
unbelievable,
2 out of 8 US intelligence agencies are now said to favor a lab leak with low to moderate confidence.
The thing I like most about Biden is his transparency. Just like in the Hunter Biden laptop. No.
And there's renewed focus on the wider issue of the risks of lab work with dangerous pathogens.
Wow, we get to the nub of it. This is taken 3 minutes, 10 seconds to get to this point where they say the real truth. This is what the concern is. Here we are in front of a lab. They're doing experiments on all sorts of different things. They're swapping over genes. They're fucking around with things in a way that is esoteric to us, and they're causing viruses to be extremely strong. And then they're being released from the lab. Even if they're not being released on purpose, they're being released from the lab. So between 2001 and 2007, I think there was 7 leaks from a lab, at least in Britain, that I reported on in Porton Down's Ideological Cloud. These guys are leaking this crap all over the place all of the time because their pipes are rusty. They don't give a shit about anything, and sometimes they want it to be out. Sometimes a nefarious group within inside this larger group says, no, fuck all the protocols. All the people who had been previously dealing with outbreaks and had been assigned for that, those sort of groups that had been assigned for that in 2001, they all had an idea of what to do during foot and mouth. They all had a protocol. They like, oh, let's initiate the protocols in response to foot and mouth disease. And this new group came in who had been coincidentally studying it for the past 6 months before it accidentally got released, or however it was. All of these other people, they had this protocol, and that was all just pushed to the side as soon as the moment of panic came in. It was just coming up to the elections as well, so Tony Blair was pushed into accepting that it had to happen as quickly as possible. In actual fact, Roy Anderson said that the pandemic would be over basically on election day, and that was a coup for his mate Tony Blair too.
Although the political partisanship still looms large.
The original mortality rate.
Robert Redfield was a Trump appointee to one of America's top scientific jobs.
You know, I have 12 living grandchildren out of my 14. I think they're at high risk for a great pandemic in the next decade or two.
Okay, they're in high risk. Now, great pandemics are supposed to be every 100 years. So they're releasing shit from labs and they're making it every 10 to 20 years. Is there a reason behind that? And he's like, oh, there's going to be a great pandemic. Of course there's going to be a fucking great pandemic. They keep releasing shit from the lab. You're just telling us they're going to do it.
And I think that pandemic is going to be caused by man, not nature, either intentional bioterrorism or possibly just a lab accident.
You've no right to tell me not to ask.
Okay, bioterrorism or a lab accident. No state and overarching organization trying to reduce population, because that's a possibility there too. The fact that these things are released on purpose for a specific reason, the reason that happens once they are released. If they are being released, they're either being released by accident or they're being released on purpose. None of these guys say being released on purpose. None of them. Listen to all. Go back through this. Listen to it all. Listen to all it. None of them say released on purpose. They nearly always say, like 99.999% of the time, released by accident or naturally occurring.
Questions? All the right. Under what grounds? The signs of China's heavy-handed political control have been there from the start.
Oh, look how heroic the BBC are, fighting to get the information from this nasty Chinese who have kept us thinking that it wasn't a lab leak. Narrative.
And the mystery of what happened in Wuhan has become one of the most controversial questions of our time. But it's also one of the most important.
Controversial because you knew and you covered it up. Controversial because the people who were working over in China at the time include Edward C. Holmes, don't they? Include people who were intimately involved in producing this narrative and the response to it.
Where did COVID come from? John Sudworth, BBC News, New York.
Unbelievable.
Well, we're joined now by Ravi Gupta, Professor of Clinical...
This guy, I mean, he looks like, he's just perfect for the BBC, isn't he? And what type of school do you go through? The school of stiffness, the rod up the butt school.
Clinical microbiology at the University of Cambridge. Professor Gupta, thank you very much for being with us. More than 3 years since this virus was first detected, lots of theories still abound regarding where it came from. Where do you think the virus came from?
Oh, wow. Who have they got on then? Who have they got on? Do you think they've got on someone who believes in lab leaks, or do you think they're going to perpetuate natural origins, the theory that is the true conspiracy theory? The true conspiracy theory is that somehow us interacting with bats in nature caused this, and then they've chopped down bats, they've fed them to us, and we've caught COVID through eating bats from a wet market or whatnot, and then it's been able to progress into being able to transfer from human to human. Which again, these are massive leaps. You don't realize how big the leaps are. People don't realize it's not like, well, you got contaminated. If you got bad food, you're sick. You're sick with food poisoning. You puke it all out, and you stay in your bed. But the chances that they can then it's then mutated to be able to be passed through some form of flu, that's so far out. I really mean so far out. What's he going to say? I think you probably can guess.
Well, it's clear that there are two main possibilities. One is that it was a natural spillover, and as has been mentioned in this program, these events are happening continually, and there is a very, very high risk for them happening. Most of them, of course, don't become pandemics, but many human infections occur as a result of transmission from animals. And then, of course, the other possibility is that whilst investigating viruses in bats, that researchers at the Wuhan Institute of Virology inadvertently introduced a virus that was in the...
So the two opportunities, he's labeled them out pretty clearly. He's labeled them out. The one possibility is it's from nature, and that happens all of the time. He's saying all of the time. Now, what do you mean that happens? What, it transfers from animal to human in a way that causes a pandemic all of the time? I don't think that is so. I think everybody knows that. My research, I feel like describing what I see is really hard to do. Really, really hard to do. But the only other alternative, inadvertent lab leak. It must have been inadvertent. There's no chance that there's any type of reason why this would be useful to the Great Reset and to society as a whole to have a whole world under an authoritarian thumb. No reason, no person in power would want us under the thumb or the jackboot of authoritarianism. What a stupid idea! Why would you want to do something that would cause that? What, my jackboot? Ooh, be my jackboot.
Wild initially, but then through leak in the lab or practices or infections in the lab, ended up enabling that virus to transmit into humans, with the market as a main expansion zone for that virus. So those are the two main possibilities in people's minds. Of course, the probability is weighted towards the natural spillover event.
Why is it so important?
There you go. It's weighted towards the natural spillover event. So he says it's either one of these two things, and they say it for as long as possible. So it sounds like he's considering it, but he's not. He's going to just go, but it always towards this, even though all the evidence is saying the opposite and has said the opposite. But these people have been covering up. This man, these two men here, are still covering it up while trying to look like they're thinking about it, but they're not even thinking about it. They're just covering it up still. They're still covering it up, and now they've got to cover it up publicly because it's so obvious. And in a while, in a year or two, they'll be like, yes, it was definitely a leak, and they'll have this guy back on, and he'll again turn around and say, oh yes, but there's natural spillover all the time, natural spillover, and they will spread the fucking line. He's a gupta.
Understand precisely where this virus came from.
I think there are two answers to that. I think that if this had not been such a severe pandemic with so much loss of life and so much economic destruction, then potentially the precise event will have been of less interest. But
it's not. This was not an event where people died because in mass, in a terrible way, in a way that's unusual, from a cold. This was an event where people were put into lockdown. Entire continents were put to a halt. A Great Reset agenda was installed. Experimental gene therapy was first implemented on human beings en masse. That's what this is. That's what this is. I'm wrapping him up in meat and vegetables, and I'm gonna put him inside some pastry, and I'm gonna cook him in the oven, and I'm gonna eat him, and then I'll have coronavirus. That's how sensible it sounds. His idea and his want is to spread the idea that, look, this guy here, the normal guy on the street, the one, yeah, look, he's unwashed. He hasn't washed his place. I tell you, if this guy's serving food, yeah, and people go to him all the time and they go home and they're getting ill from their food, they won't go back to him, so they won't be continuing with food. This is how wet markets look like in different parts of the world. This is a narrative. Oh, this is dirty. Therefore, this is where the origins is. This is what they do. This is all lies.
Because this was such a major event, I think people really, really want to know exactly what happened, and they want to know all the possibilities, even if those possibilities are small. And
the part again, it's about reducing the narrative, the size. Oh, the possibility came, even if the possibilities are very small. That came from the Wuhan lab. They're reporting it like it may have come from the Wuhan lab, even if it's very small. It's very tiny. It's very tiny. It's a fact. It's a fact. We know it came from a lab. Come on, hey, you're a scientist. You're a liar. You're going to be revealed by history. You're going to be revealed by history as having a pasty on your face. A pasty. Pasty in your eyes. Pasty glasses. Pasty Gupta.
I do support that. So I think that's one of the key reasons that people, the public, want to know. Scientists
get ready for the duper's delight on the side of his mouth.
We want to get to the facts. That's what we do.
Right. Okay. One thing that you've got to say for this as well, when you're watching facial features, I mean, I'm not going to be an expert, okay, but I know certain things about facial features. I watch people all the time. I can tell you, he is not expressive. He's purposely holding his emotions, his face, his facial muscles. He is controlling it. And all of this says to me that he is not telling the truth. He might even be trying to read whatever he's written before, though. So that can be multiple things. He could be just nervous about being on TV. But to me, this looks like he knows.
And whether it makes much difference in terms of where we go from here is more debatable, because we realize that that laboratories are places where we do need a degree of oversight and.
Listen to that.
Need a degree.
A degree. Now, this is the thing. That's a sign that is. He doesn't want to say that. He doesn't want to say they need a degree of oversight. So this is why people's language is. Works the way it does. Sometimes it's just so obvious. Sometimes I mean, again, this is 97% chance that I'm right and it's the 3% chance I'm wrong, and that's how he's painting the lab leak theory to natural origins as well.
Places where we do need a degree of oversight and regulation of what is conducted in those laboratories. And of course,
yes, we do.
If this was a natural spillover, then the implications are that we need to think about how we might limit those cross-species transmissions in wet markets or.
So he gives it two, but then he goes back to the other one and he's talking still about putting some sort of sanctions on wet market. We need to do this. But I mean, these people, they're just unbelievable.
Or in other forms of human-animal interface.
Why are your mirrors not up on your wall?
Whether this does prove to be a lab leak or not, many people may question why a lab in the first place would be holding on to so many deadly pathogens and viruses at all. Why?
Yeah, why? I think it was, if I remember correctly, something like 300,000 of the 7 different types of foot and mouth are held in a lab in the UK. 300,000 types, variations or samples. Now I could be wrong, and it could be 30,000, but it's one of the two. It's like that amount, or at least that was in the past. It's probably more now, and of more viruses because they make more all of the time. why do we need that many things held in a lab? Why do we need to do all of this? Why are we creating these killer viruses and sticking them in storage? What are we sticking them in storage for? Oh, so we can work out later. Well, computers later on will be able to work it out without having to have stored samples, won't they? Yes. So what are you doing it for? No reason. No reason. We just need millions of viruses sitting around in fridges. We need to use that so we can fight against these environmental spillover from our negative effect on the environment. Okay, so what about having loads of fridges, hundreds of thousands of fridges full of viruses? Is that negative for the environment to have that many fridges used for something so dangerous and be powered for all of that? Oh, there's so much to this, isn't there? These guys, they're full of pasty.
Might a laboratory need to or want to hold on to these kinds of things?
Well, I think that view supposes that the viruses have been identified, but for some time, of course, when you bring specimens from bats into a lab under containment, you don't necessarily know what is in those samples. So they then need to undergo a process of sequencing, in other words, to figure out what genetic codes are.
Wait, because they're producing samples in the lab. So they get a sample and then they mix it around and they fiddle with it and they reproduce it and they do loads of tests on it and then they make a load of hundreds of other samples, thousands of other samples, and then they do loads of complex experiments on them. They don't just find them out there in nature and then bring them back to the lab. Is that what he's saying? Is he seriously still so far on the nature line that they're creating this narrative that everything is brought in from nature? Let's see what he's saying again.
Necessarily know what is in those samples. So specimens from bats into a lab. Well, I think that view supposes that
they bring specimens from bats into labs. So they get the bats outside. There's no bats in any labs. There's no bats. But they were saying earlier on, bats in labs, weren't they?
Been identified, but for some time, of course, when you bring specimens from bats into a lab under containment, you don't necessarily know what is in those samples. So
they're saying they got these specimens, they bring them from bats, and then they look at them in the lab. So it's like we go to only the natural world, collect those specimens, and those are the only ones that exist. Because that's a lie. We know that's a lie. The majority are manipulated and tested on. Have been altered in some way, and that happens within the lab. And animal experimentation is going on inside the lab. To think that you go to nature, get the samples, and go back to the lab. No, they take nature, they stick it in a lab, they torture it, they abuse it, they make it sick. They take all of the results and they put it in loads of little test tubes and loads of little samples everywhere, and they work out how that can transfer to humans and how they can make that transfer to humans. And then it leaks from a lab and kills a load of people. And they use it as an impetus to push forward an agenda of gene therapy research on the entire race. This is bigger than Hitler, mate. This is bigger than Hitler. This person on the screen now. Wow.
They then need to undergo a process of sequencing, in other words, to figure out what genetic codes are in there and what viruses those represent. And then to know which ones are dangerous or not, you then need to have a greater understanding through one of the ways we figure that out is through laboratory experiments.
Yeah, through laboratory experiments, but then they reproduce. They find something dangerous and they keep reproducing it. What happens if you keep reproducing something that's dangerous? Does it stay in the one place? If you have a building full of dangerous ninjas and you keep this building is a small 3-bedroom apartment overlooking a lake with a school, and you don't want ninjas around the school who are throwing their ninja stars all around the place, but you keep having these ninjas reproducing in this 3-bedroom apartment, and eventually what happens? Do the ninjas all stay as they reproduce? Do they stay inside the apartment? No. Ninja stars everywhere. Children running through the playground, avoiding constant ninja stars. That is where we are.
And so the level of risk in any one particular sample is very much unknown, and that's probably why we do need to do certain research in the right containment and safety, safe environments.
Right, look at that. This is why we need to do the research, the right research in, and he's reading that off carefully. So let's go back to here. He's
then
reading this
to
off
know
carefully.
which ones are dangerous or not, you then need to have a greater understanding through one of the ways we figure that out is through laboratory experiments. And so the level of risk in any one particular sample is very much unknown, and that's probably why we do need to do certain research in the right containment and safety, safe environments in order to expand our knowledge of what is out there.
I think he's a bad reader.
Because
expand our knowledge of what is out there so that we can put it into a lab, make it even more potent, and release it into the world, either by accident or on purpose, but never say on purpose. I will never say on purpose. We will never say on purpose. We will never say on purpose. We will never say on purpose. Say it after me, please. We will never say on purpose. Say it after me, please. We will never say on purpose. It could not be on purpose. There is no chance it's on purpose. What's the point of being on purpose? Why would it be on purpose? We don't even think about that. We don't even think about that. We don't even want to put that as a possibility. Even for natural origins or as accidental lab leak, there is no other option. You're given the two. There's no way it's on purpose. There's no way it's on purpose. There's no way it's on purpose. There's no way it's on purpose.
we don't know what's out there and what's dangerous, we will struggle to defend ourselves in the future from the natural spillover events that happen in nature and then transmit into humans.
Okay, Professor Ravi Gupta from the University of Cambridge, thank you very much.
Bastard! 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 NEWSPASTE.
What we know is that we will end up with many more unemployed